morning and good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I am the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us, and special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, happens to be In-House Connect. Sometimes In-House Connect sponsors the programs because we identify amazing thought leaders that we know our audience would be delighted to learn from, and that's the case today. It's a pleasure to have Val Madamba on with us today, who is going to teach us essential skills for dynamic legal presentations, the in-house toolkit. This is our 8th webinar of the year, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time or have you tuned into an IHC webinar before? Looks like we have a 90-10 split, meaning 10% are new. So welcome to the 10% that are here for the first time at In-House Connect, and welcome back to the 90% of you who have tuned into a IHC webinar before. It's great to see you again. Let's get to today's program, Essential Skills for Dynamic Legal Presentations, the In-House Toolkit. Again, it's a pleasure to have Val Madamba on with us. As a former FDA, big law, and in-house lawyer, Val knows just how to translate legal and regulatory needs to the language of the business and just how to break through to your most demanding clients and stakeholders. With over 15 years in practice, consulting, and training, she's heard and delivered. She's studied and refined the art of creating legal presentations that engage every audience and do justice to each speaker's unique expertise. And she can't wait to help you present your most powerful voice yet. Again, it's a huge pleasure and an honor to have Valerie on with us today. So Val, welcome to In-House Connects.
Thank you so much, Shai. Hello, everyone. I am so glad to be here. As Shai mentioned, I'm going to definitely be looking for a lot of input from you guys, and starting off with a poll that I'm extremely interested in. I do want to talk to you about presentation skills, but I'm really here for the TV recommendations because I need a series. So what is the greatest TV series of the 21st century? Oh, coming in fast: Mad Men, The Sopranos, Succession, The Wire, Game of Thrones, or what else in the chat? I know I've left out. It's a crime that I've left out certain things, but I'd love to hear from you. Hey, Game of Thrones, strong.
So, it's funny. I've been like going back and forth to Legal Week. I was just telling Val behind the scenes, and Bryan Cranston was the keynote speaker today. So I'm in a big time. I'm on a Breaking Bad kick. So I gotta say, Breaking Bad. Somebody chimed in the chat private message that My Cousin Vinny, although it's not a TV show, but My Cousin Vinny, that's a good one. There's Billions. There's a lot of great. Thank you, audience, for coming through. Entourage, that's a great one too. Back to you, Val.
Yeah, absolutely. I gotta agree with My Cousin Vinny. Absolute classic. So yes, I love this. Bluey currently obsessed in our home. But thank you for chiming in. Looks like in terms of the options I put out there, Game of Thrones is the clear winner. Thank you for the recommendations, by the way. But thinking about these selections, anything you've chosen, but also if these didn't resonate, other series, movies, books, plays you've seen. Whoops. What are some of the common elements that have spoken to you, that have gripped you? What do you think some of these great stories have in common? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What do you think? Some testosterone, okay. Relationships, absolutely. Yes. Development. I love that. The slow burn of The Wire. A lot of humor. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Flawed characters, a hero. Dwight Schrute, for sure. I'm sorry for not including The Office. That was really my bad. Tension, yes. And storytelling. So movement, engagement, right? Relatable antagonist, not just the hero. Obstacle, struggle, yes. All of this. These are the elements to great stories that stick with us, that really draw us in, that capture our attention, right? And so it seems like there's some universal agreement about what these elements are. So not having taken your opinions on that, but when I was making a wild guess, a lot of the same things that you guys mentioned. Intriguing plot, relatable heroes or anti-heroes, vile villains that we love to hate, maybe that we can see ourselves in a bit, triumph, struggle, suspense, and then resolution of some form, right? So now I want you to keep your answers, the things that you thought about in thinking of these great stories and some of these common elements. I'm going to show you a couple slides, and I want you to tell me which of these elements jump out at you and grip you from these slides. How about this one? What do you think? What's your feel? Drama? Intrigue? Meh? Okay, images, too much text. Yeah, so here there is a visual. It's kind of not too bad. There's some nice shadowy stuff going on. But yeah, it's okay. Telling it like it really is a bit boring and a bit busy. So there's a lot going on, right? And lots of elements. Underlying all of this, there's probably something of value, but it's really hard to figure out what it could be. So it tends to be what we've all seen before. And if you're here, if you're in this profession, I'm going to guess that you've seen presentations that take this approach. I mean, I've certainly created and delivered a lot of presentations back in the day that looked and felt like this because it is a standard approach. But when we do this and we kind of throw a lot of information at our audiences in this style, it's what I like to refer to as the kitchen sink, right? Kind of including everything that we know instead of doing that real work, the hard work of curating the information and identifying what it is that each audience needs at any given moment. So today, what we're going to look at is one tool that we can use to help us avoid the kitchen sink approach and really deliver precisely what each audience needs. And that, as you may have guessed, is story. And here, the key to a persuasive legal presentation is the right business story. Okay, and so again, when we think about story, it's easy to get kind of intimidated by this idea that, you know, we have to be incorporating a lot of high drama or, you know, lots of theatrics. It has to be the Odyssey, but we don't need to go to that length, right? I'd like us to think about story a little bit more pragmatically and in a way that's a little bit more accessible to everybody. I'd like us to think about story as more of a tool for giving structure to things that would otherwise be very loose, maybe disparate and hard to grasp. So if you think about information as a bunch of like pebbly gravel, right? And you're giving it to somebody, you're dumping it in a yard in your dump truck, and then you say, well, feel free to take this to your home a couple miles away, and they don't have any way of doing that, and you just drive away and say good luck. It's kind of like what we do with a kitchen sink presentation. We just throw a bunch of gravel at our audiences and, you know, expect them to do the work of making it into something useful. But when we use structure or story to structure our information, our presentations, we give our audiences a container that they can then use to give structure to all of that information and then finally figure out the next step and make it useful for their needs. So I love this example from the world of film. Sometimes reality is too complex. Stories give it form. So today we're going to look at a couple of different aspects of how we can use story in a practical way for our everyday business communications and business presentations. So the aspects we're going to look at are structure, how to structure our stories in a logical and accessible way, and how to sell our stories. And I know that the idea, maybe especially in this profession, of having to sell can be a little bit intimidating. Maybe it's not really what we identify with primarily, but at the end of the day, when we are trying to get folks on board with a recommendation or even the idea of working with legal, we are selling and we are convincing. So we're going to look at some strategies for that. And finally, we're going to look at some new ways and doable ways to visualize our stories, to boost comprehension, recall, and understanding, and let our message and our key content really shine through. So, starting off with the aspect of structure. What kind of structure can we use for a legal business presentation? Again, when we think of the stories we know and love to be entertained by, I mean, these can be hours long sagas that are many generations long. But for our purposes, we can simplify the structure of a story into 3 parts: why, what, and how. Okay. And so these are the basic building blocks of a story that we can use every day. And they're not only useful for creating structure and form for our most complex ideas and concepts, but they're the springboard for movement for our organizations, right? So these are the ingredients that help our audiences, our clients, get to a better place. And in storytelling, in the hero's journey, right, we think about a better place as a better state, maybe spiritually or mentally, emotionally for the protagonist. But here, we're often talking about lower risk or opening up key opportunities, or even, just condensing an important timeline, and often all of these things together. So the focus of our business presentations is going to be showcasing this change, this transformation and movement from the status quo, where there's going to be some form of conflict, something that needs to be resolved, to a better place in a way that benefits the organization and that benefits the audience. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can use this structure in a business presentation. So we would start out, first, I should say that there are a lot of ways to structure a story, but I find that this one is really usable and accessible for at least organizing your thoughts for practical business conversations. So we'd start out by setting the scene, right? So who are the characters? What is the context? Who's at play and what are their struggles? And what is an underlying conflict that is related to the topic you'll be addressing? So what might some tension be, whether it's known to your audience, or maybe it's one of their blind spots that you are specifically situated to help point out. So when we start with establishing this scene and the status quo, what's important here is that we're also addressing what might be at stake if our audience, if our clients don't ultimately adopt the right actions and what we're recommending. And so sometimes when I recommend starting this way, folks can get a little bit skittish about diving straight into the conflict. And I totally get that, especially for in-house counsel, where we are always trying to get the right balance, right, of being enabling and supportive, but also pointing out the relevant risks and, making sure that the relevant responsibilities and obligations are known to our clients. And so, and not being the department of no all the time or at all. So the thing is, setting the stage with conflict is so key, because this is the only way to set up a satisfying resolution eventually. And that resolution is going to take place in the next couple of steps. So the what is where you give a preview of that resolution. And that resolution is a bridge from today, the current status quo, to that better place. And the way that I like to think about articulating the what is through a core message. And that core message is simply a theme, the single theme that you will be sticking to in your presentation. And again, in all kinds of presentations, legal especially, we've got all kinds of experience and research and knowledge that we might feel like adding in and displaying. And that's what leads to the kitchen sink, right? And so this is why your core message is so key. It's so important to spend some time identifying what that core message is for your specific audience, because when you stick to one theme, you'll then be laser focused on what that audience needs, and you won't be all over the place like it is so easy to do, and kind of what characterizes many typical legal presentations. So in a minute, we'll take a look at one way of actually articulating that core message. So now that you've set the foundation of context, conflict, what's at stake, you've given a preview of what your solution, your resolution is going to be. Finally, you get to the how, and that is your specific solution and recommendation. And so here in the how, you're going to spend the bulk of your presentation addressing this and substantiating the solution you're proposing. But by this point in the presentation, you've given some exposition, which is so critical because, again, it sets out what's at stake and establishes that you have identified a way forward. All right, so let's dive quickly into the details of what a core message would look like. So again, like I said, it's your theme, but how can we easily and quickly and in a succinct way express that theme? One formula that I found works really well is simply to identify the action, the specific action you want your audience to take, and one or two benefits, the primary benefits, and think about the benefits that are going to be most relevant to this audience. So if you're presenting, let's say, to the C-suite, you might be thinking about some kind of higher level business goals. Whereas if you're presenting to a sales team, you might be more laser focused on meeting certain sales targets or numbers. So just make sure it's audience focused when you're identifying that benefit. All right, so one example of a core message could be this: to build a resilient brand. That's the benefit. Let's prioritize supply chain compliance. And prioritizing supply chain compliance in this case is the action. So you can see that this kind of pithy statement is really high level, and you don't spend a ton of time on it, but you do give it a bit of a spotlight after you've set the stage for the status quo. Because again, it is your resolution. And from this point, this core message is going to impact and color everything else you present in your talk. So from this point, everything that you discuss in the how section should directly support this core message. All right, so we're going to look at this in practice. And today we're going to visit with a friend of ours. Her name is Paula. Paula is an in-house counsel at a cosmetics company. It's a quickly growing company that's been around for a couple of years. And Paula is a member of a 3-person small legal team. And over the years, they've had quite a few quality and safety challenges. So the legal team has decided that it is time to introduce a company-wide compliance training program. And Paula is spearheading this initiative. So the next step she takes after sketching out the proposal and the program is to take it to the quality control team leadership. So she manages to get 20 minutes on the schedule of their next quarterly meeting. So she's getting ready to put together her proposal for this particular program. And let's look at how she could apply the 3-part structure that we just discussed to this proposal. So why, what, and how? To start, she chooses to begin with a story about a competitor in the same industry. This one's a little bit more mature, it's publicly traded, but it's come out in the news that they've experienced quite a few safety issues that are very similar to the ones Paula and her team have observed. And that led to a lot of backlash in the media, negative effects on their stock price, and a loss of a retail partnership that had already been announced, and the retailer just pulled out because it couldn't accept the quality concerns that had come up or the safety concerns that had been introduced. And in this story, Paula is highlighting a number of risks that her company, that she knows this particular team would do anything to avoid, and rightly so. So after getting into that exposition, she quickly moved on to her core message, displaying the action and benefits of what she's proposing. To remain number one, we must invest in a robust safety culture. So to remain number one, that's the benefit. And this team, this leadership team, cares deeply about that goal. We must invest in a robust safety culture. And that is the high level action. And then finally, Paula moves into the how, which is her specific pitch. And that is adopting the new safety compliance program. And she's asking specifically for their buy-in for that program. Okay, so that is one example of how you can use this really straightforward 3-part structure to just get yourself organized and build up intrigue and interest in what you'll be proposing. So again, we start with the problem, and don't worry about positioning yourself as the Department of No, because all you're doing is introducing honestly the tension and conflict that you'll be resolving. But you're going to move on quickly from there after you identify and illustrate what's really at stake. And you're going to spend most of your time talking about new possibilities and how your recommendations, your legal solutions can be a part of that. All right, so moving on to the concept of selling. I just had to use this word because I think it's, like, again, we don't really want to, well, at least me, I've never been that comfortable with the idea of being kind of a salesperson as in-house counsel, but I've warmed to the idea over the years because I realized, especially with presentations, that there's no such thing as a purely informative presentation. Any presentation I've ever seen or given that was really worth giving was persuasive by nature. And so when we sell, we are selling that specific solution. So before we go on, I want you to think about, in your organization, the toughest crowd. Like, who is it that you don't really want to present to tomorrow, but you might have to? What do you think? And what makes them so challenging? The executive team, indeed. The board. Okay, so a lot of leadership mentions. Okay, in specific teams, I saw sales and product. Definitely feel that. And executives. So what are some characteristics? Oh, I see. Trouble with change. Okay. Yep. Resisting change a couple of times. What else are some other characteristics that make them so tough? Yeah, and definitely depends on the topic. Oh, the Lone Ranger. Okay, there's always one of those. Yeah, different mindset. Yeah, wanting to move fast to market. Yeah, different needs, different teams, different needs, right? And you guys are pointing out the themes that I see and I hear from my clients every day. A lot of the same reasons, no matter what your practice is, whether it's regulatory, like my background is, or contracting, whatever it is, there's a lot of resistance to change. Yes, Carl, opinions developed from prior experience, and especially from prior experience with legal. Yeah, that we can't know all about. But, some of our clients before working with us, maybe they've had not so great experiences with legal counsel, for better or for worse, or for whatever reason that didn't get them where they wanted to go. So it can be inertia, like a lot of you said, resistance to change, a lot of competing priorities, and just, yeah, creatives who are invested in what they do, just like we're invested in legal compliance regulatory, right? So a lot of reasons that can add up to major bias and resistance. So if our in-house cosmetics counsel, Paula, is presenting her pitch to, let's say, the regulatory team, who's 100% on board already, it's going to be no problem. But the reason that we care so much about making our presentations more effective and persuasive is because we're usually not pitching and presenting and trying to win over such warm crowds, right? So we're going to look at a couple of really simple human tactics for selling our solutions. Okay, so when we are selling the how, we're selling a couple of different aspects of it. There's a solution itself, but there's also the need to sell the partnership with legal specifically, right? And so these aspects can't be really taken apart. They're so intertwined, but we're going to look at them tactically separately. So let's start with, how can we sell a specific solution? We got to ask ourselves this critical question. What does your client need to believe about your proposal? So it's not so much, what does your client need to know about the legal background or know about the law, but what do they need to believe? And from my experience and from my conversations with clients and my friends who are still in the trenches, yeah, they need to believe that it's urgent, feasible, highly valuable. A couple of you said they need to know what's in it for them. Exactly. It's for their benefit. They need to understand why they should make your proposal a priority above others, because they've got other things to do and other pressures that are weighing on them, right? So how can we illustrate the urgency, feasibility, and value of what we're proposing? There are, okay, a couple of ways, well, millions of ways to do this, but I want to just focus on one specific storytelling technique that we can always use, especially when the content is very complicated. So here I'm just going to focus on the why and the how, and a way to bridge the two. So the technique is to start, again, with an opening scenario that illustrates the conflict. So we looked at this a few minutes ago when we first got to know how to use this, how to set up our presentation, starting with why. So try to identify an opening scenario that, it can be hypothetical, it can be taken from an important case, it can be a composite, or it can be something real, but it should be something that your audience can see themselves in, or maybe can see themselves wanting to avoid getting into. So opening scenario that establishes the conflict. And then when you get into the how, you want to divide your how into 1 to 3 kind of chunks or elements or specific insights. Up to 3 is pretty much what we can handle at any given moment. And then when you get into the weeds of each element, tell a story or share a scenario that reimagines or that illustrates how that opening scenario could have turned out differently, or how your element, each element, could have transformed that outcome or led to a dramatically different and positive outcome. So you can do that for each one. And then to kind of round out your illustration and give your discussion some more texture and depth, you can add 1 or 2 other anecdotes or examples just to give it some more complexity and nuance. So let's go back to our friend Paula. So Paula's pitch to the quality team was a huge success. They gave her approval to go ahead with and spearhead this new compliance program. Okay, so now she's actually going to be part of giving these trainings, and her next presentation is going to be for the local quality control team at one of their production facilities. And she's going to focus on the importance of inspection readiness. And she's going to try to train the team on specifically how to get ready for a regulatory inspection. So to apply this particular storytelling tactic and drive home why her solution will benefit or how it will benefit the team, she's going to start with an opening scenario about an inspection gone wrong. And maybe this is at her previous company, or it's a hypothetical. But the story that she tells is about a surprise inspection at a facility much like their own, where the inspector comes, their records at the facility are a disaster. They're all over the place. They're supposed to be electronic, but they're in paper and just totally incomplete. They had no idea, the team had no idea who the regulator was, had never gotten the right permits or made any kind of interaction or built any relationships with them. And they were just completely unprepared for carrying out their roles and responsibilities. So these are the aspects that Paula wants to focus on. So when she gets to the how, and she focuses on records, rehearsals, and relationships, she's going to use a new anecdote to reimagine how things could have gone better, or how a future inspection could go much better if the team were to adopt her specific recommendations on these three elements. So for example, with records, she might start by saying, she might first give a little bit of legal introduction, and then illustrate that in an inspection, in the next surprise inspection, if we just get started with digitizing our records, even though we're not going to get to full compliance in 6 months or so, we'll at least have established the right foundation. And she believes that this will be enough to establish goodwill and set the tone for a successful inspection next time. And so the same would go for the concepts of rehearsals and relationships. And then again, she could add in one or two relevant anecdotes from her experience or from recent regulatory enforcement actions, just to round out the full picture. So that's, again, just one tactic that you can use. But I find that it's especially useful when we've got a lot of detail that we need to share and we dive into the weeds. And when we do that, we can use this tactic to bring everyone back to a singular reference point. So we're not introducing too many new facts. We're just changing what the future could look like. And this helps to simplify and promote understanding and just provide a nice continuous through line to help everyone stay on the same page. Okay, so now I'd like to look at the second aspect, all important aspect of selling legal solutions, persuading them that it is a great idea and highly desirable to be partnering with legal. So for this, we have to ask ourselves that question. This next question, what does your client need to believe about you? So I'll pause here. I mean, I don't think this is necessarily exclusive to legal, but whenever you're looking to onboard or bring on any advisor, especially on a sensitive subject, what do you need to believe about them before you hire them? Trusted partner, yes. Trust, again, yes. What else? Yes, partner, problem solver. Yeah, whether it's your lawyer, right, credible, yeah, solution oriented, likable. Yeah, why not? Why not likable? Wouldn't that be great if our lawyers or our personal trainers or financial advisors are nice people and will not make it worse? So yeah, I mean, just to sum up what I thought you were going to say and that you guys have gotten to, we need our clients to believe that we're equal partners, an ideal guide, and just generally good human beings that they're going to want to talk to. So we need to establish that we're equal partners, not kind of academics who are just going to swoop in and tell them what they definitely cannot do and what they definitely have to do, and then kind of say bye. But that they're equal partners, we're ideal guides. We have the wisdom that's necessary to advise them, but we're also people who understand their challenges and are fully invested in their success just as much as they are. And again, we want to be good, likable people that they can talk to without judgment, and who can open up a really collaborative relationship where they look to us as members of their inner circle when they have to make hard decisions. So what are a few tactics that we can use to impress this upon our clients. First, in a presentation, we can share a personal learning story. So this one is really powerful, but it does require you to be a little bit vulnerable. And what I mean by a personal learning story is sharing something about a moment where you had to grapple with the complexities of what you're trying to get them to understand and adopt and learn. Because it's true, you are the expert now. You are many paces ahead of your client. But at one point, you were not. And you became an expert through some challenge and effort and learning and experience. So when you share a story of how you did that, maybe you even made some significant missteps. Yeah, it's a little bit like an interview tactic, but it definitely works to engender trust, right? So choose a story that feels appropriate to you, right? And it should be genuine. You don't want to, obviously, you don't want to fabricate anything, but you don't want it to be something that's extremely high stakes or that just happened yesterday, right? Like I made a huge mistake just yesterday on this topic that I'm trying to teach you about. Probably don't want to choose that, but maybe something earlier on in your career where you can reflect on a big mistake you made. I mean, in my practice, when I was a few years into one of my in-house jobs, I misinterpreted a regulation. And I really thought that I was going to have to call the C-suite and let them know we had to do a product recall. That I just thought we had to. And of course, I got some validation, but I let my head of legal know, he trusted me, and I said, yeah, we got to pull the trigger on this thing. It's going to be expensive. The publicity is going to be bad, but we have to. Long story short, I was really wrong. It was a very complicated regulation to parse, but I did not know how to do it at that point. I did not know that there were so many layers to it, and so much regulatory and legislative history to parse on this particular topic. I really learned the hard way, but it was a near miss. So a near miss can be a nice example to share because things turned out okay. It wasn't, the stakes weren't extremely dire, but it was a real learning. And when you find an experience like this that you can share, which is incidentally, I use this story whenever I was teaching years later, that same concept, very complex concept, you accomplish a couple of things. You reflect and you show that you're reflective and that you're a person, but you also show a kind of empathy, especially when you're talking about very complex subjects, because you're acknowledging that this stuff is hard and that you had to go through it the hard way too, but that you can help your clients avoid similar pain or any of that pain because you are now on the other side of that learning. You've established, and you are, through this story, able to prove your wisdom and hindsight, which is what your clients need on these particular subjects, right? So wisdom through experience. Another topic or another tactic, this one is really more of a shift to using more common language. And I love this because it's just so accessible. It's so easy to do. But when you use more common language like let's or us or we, it just make this subtle shift towards collective action, a collective call to action. So our friend Paula, she might say, instead of record keeping compliance is critical, she might say something like, let's invest or let's upgrade our record keeping system to make it the best in the industry, or something like that. And so again, that signifies that you're on one team and reinforces that you are part of that team and have shared goals with your client. So now that we have established our exposition, what's at stake, what the challenges are, and given a lot of really relevant and specific proof for how our solutions are going to create benefits for our clients and why our clients should adopt our solutions, now we can move on. Some of the fun stuff, relatively fun stuff, visualizing and creating visuals and slides, props if you want to. You can bring in a rubber chicken or whatever you like. But we're going to focus on slides here because that's what we all use. And I do think that they, when used correctly, can be very effective. So before we get too much into the weeds, I want to remind you, the presentation is you. The presentation is not a deck. I don't know if you've ever taken this tack, but when I was, especially when I was an associate, I would get asked all the time in my downtime to put together a deck. And I really thought that that was what a presentation was. Fire up PowerPoint and take all like the notes or substance of a memo and just kind of like funnel it into PowerPoint the way that it's set up to do. But the presentation is not a deck. The presentation is your carefully curated content and storyline, as we've talked about up till this point. So there's a reason that we're addressing visuals as the last step in your preparation process. So get your story straight, get your message and your examples and stories and anecdotes and case studies all lined up, and then use that to inform your visuals. That will make it much easier for you, as well as making sure that every single visual is perfectly relevant to your core message. So I want to know from you guys, before we go on, what do you think is your biggest challenge in designing presentations? If it's challenging for you, formatting too much info, all the detail, all the background, yeah, keeping attention. Yes, takes a lot of time for sure. Okay, being succinct. See a lot of, yes, how to handle background and volume. Okay. Yeah, okay, so just from skimming PowerPoint settings, I know less is more is hard. I know. I keep droning on all the time about how less is really more, just use less. But it is really hard. And so in this section, we're going to look at some specific ways that we can take a less is more strategy to our slides. But just looking at some of your responses here, the theme that's jumping out to me is just, what do I do with all of this information, and how do I choose what to put on my slides? So you are definitely not alone. I have for sure given and designed some abysmal presentations, usually, again, just because PowerPoint is ubiquitous, right? And so I still use PowerPoint because most everyone does. And I think it's totally fine. Everything you're going to see in the next couple of minutes comes from PowerPoint. So it's really not PowerPoint's fault, but its defaults are terrible because it's just about text, text, and more text. So I think the theme that I'm hearing is, I know I'm not supposed to do this. I don't want to show up like this, but I'm not really sure what else there is to do. So, you've seen this slide, not this exact slide. You've seen many like this. So we're going to look at a different approach that's accessible to everyone, no design skills needed. So 3 design rules. We're going to look at a lot of specific examples here, but I want you to keep just 3 core design rules in mind as we look at each one. The first one is that text is visual. Now, when we think about terrible presentations, we often think about too much text. And usually we're correct, because there is too much text in most presentations. It's just dumped there with no curation or filtering. But when we use text in the correct way, when we make sure that it is directly supporting our key messages, when we don't use too much of it, but only the minimum amount that we need, and when we give it some space to breathe on the slide, it can be very powerful. So we'll look at some examples of how we can do that. Second, diagrams instead of lists. Now, here's another thing that we universally hate about bad presentations: too many bullet point lists related to too much text, right? And bullet point lists are, of course, the default of PowerPoint. Now, not all lists are bad. This slide is a list, and hopefully you're not too mad about it, but I think it's a short one, and you can use them sparingly for things like a preview of what's coming up or a recap of what you just covered. But lists are not a very useful teaching technique for complex information because they just give you a bunch of items, but they don't show the relationships between them. Unlike a list, a diagram does show those relationships. That's what diagrams are for. So whenever you can, when you're trying to teach concepts, see how you can replace lists with diagrams. We'll look at some specific examples as well. And finally, insights over data. And this is the rule that most directly addresses the challenge of having just so much background knowledge and information. And when we have all of that, we have to pause. And when we're trying to figure out what should go in a slide, think about what is the key insight that during this presentation, in this moment, my audience needs to know right now, because we cannot do everything in a presentation. We need to stick closely to our core message and only share insights that directly support it. So take those key insights, move the rest to the side, and put those insights on your slides. Again, we'll look at some specific examples. So where do we start when it's time to get going with our slides? We got to start with the bare minimum. And these are what I call the essential slides. So first, if you're following the structure, the storytelling structure that we've talked about, you start with the core message slide. This is your big idea, your one theme. So put it on a slide with no distractions. Give it the spotlight it deserves, because you will have worked up to displaying your resolution. So you want to, again, give it the space and attention that it needs. Next, organization slides. So previews, roadmaps, transitions, and internal summaries, just to keep your audience on track. And you can easily do this with very simple text slides. Next, any prompts. So when you have questions or interactive exercises, make sure that the prompts and questions are on your slides, so that that's one less thing for your audience to have to remember and carry around with them. They can just focus on interacting and reflecting. Also, in this category, let's say you're presenting to a leadership team, the executive team, and you're asking for a specific approval, or you want them to take a specific action. Any requests that you have, put them on a slide as well, so that there's no ambiguity and it is crystal clear what you need your audience to do. And finally, any key insights. This is just like the core message slide, but when you have supporting insights that you want especially to drive home, make sure you put them on a slide. So these are the essentials, very, very simple. And we're going to look at how, again, Paula at the cosmetics company could apply these essential slides and others to her training. So she's preparing her training for a quality control team locally at her facility. And she's, again, focusing on inspection preparedness. So first, her core message. For this training, it is this: to protect our brand, we need to prioritize inspection readiness. Really, really simple. There's nothing else going on this slide, right? No distractions. Again, this core message gets to be in the spotlight. There's nothing here but nice, clean, easy to read text with a little bit of careful color contrast for extra emphasis. Next is an organization slide. So here, Paula chooses to tee up at the beginning of the training exactly what the team is going to learn. And she chooses this setup instead of the typical agenda or overview slide. And these are fine, very standard, but they usually look something like agenda, regulatory overview, recent litigation, questions, and just topics, right? It's just topics, and topics by themselves are not very compelling, especially when the audience has no idea what they really mean for them. So instead, I like to use this setup, which I call the benefit snapshot. And you just tee up what the audience is going to take away. So here, Paula highlights record keeping to avoid citations, rehearsing for confidence and preparedness, relationship building to maximize success. It's just a much more audience-centered, much more engaging list of things that the audience will be motivated to pay attention to. Prompts. So here Paula is trying to make her training as interactive as she can. So she's got a couple of questions, and she has a lot of exercises that she wants a team to engage in. So she makes sure to put those prompts directly on a slide. And finally, key insights. So she's got a couple of these. One of them is a pretty startling statistic. She thinks this will be motivating or meaningful to the team to see the amount of total fines related to this topic, related to record-keeping violations in the last year. So she's got this sampling of essential slides. This is probably not the full skeleton of essential, but they're all going to look something like this, right? It's really, really simple. It just captures the essence of her takeaways and her storyline and the interaction that she builds into this training. And at this point, she's feeling pretty good. She knows she doesn't have any graphic design skills whatsoever, but she feels pretty good about how these turned out because they're really easy to read. There's no information overwhelm. And she knows that the presentation is all about the story that she is delivering, the words coming out of her mouth, and the way that she connects with her audience. So at this point, she is ready to move on. Well, first of all, she's feeling good because she's already miles away and way ahead of this approach that she was taking years ago. So she's ready to give her slides a little bit of extra dimension. And this is where she can think about optional slides. And this is where we can use visuals, images to add extra depth in a way that text alone and words alone might not be able to. So just remember that don't feel any pressure to add images just for the sake of kind of jazzing up those slides. Focus again on your story and the content that you're delivering. But when you're looking to add context and mood, visuals and images can really help to enhance your storytelling. So showing pictures of things like faces and places and products, those are things that words alone can't do so well. So they really help to augment your story. They can also deepen understanding, especially for people who prefer to learn visually. And I think a lot of us really learn and internalize concepts most effectively when we see them and interact with them in different ways, through different dimensions. So adding images is really important to give that kind of extra nuance and another way of interacting with complex concepts. So back to Paula's training. Just going to start with this slide. Remember, her opening story for the training is all about this inspection that did not go so well because of this mess of paper records. So she finds an evocative image or an illustrative image that she thinks works well for this part of the story. And she makes sure it's a high quality one, not pixelated, not all stretchy or distorted. And she makes it full screen because this is always a great default for formatting your photos because it doesn't produce any kind of awkward space and it's super easy to do. No special tricks needed. She adds another one of these pictures at the beginning to emphasize the tension and the discomfort in the closeout meeting during that inspection. And then later, as she gets into the how, she's going to show another picture to show a more positive interaction between an inspector and one of the team members. So she thinks that, this looks pretty good. She might want to leave it like this. But for this particular point, she really wants to combine it with a key insight. So she does. She simply adds what could be like a header or a soundbite for that key insight and overlays it on that image. And to do that, she just adds a rectangle, makes it semi-transparent, and adds a text box with a nice high contrast legible text on top of that. So this is one really easy way to make sure that your text is nicely and seamlessly integrated with a photo. And again, it's in great significant contrast to slides like these, which are the typical format that we are all familiar with, where, I like to call this the plop, because what we do is we take a slide that often has quite a lot of text on it, and then we just plop in an image for a little extra flair to just give it a little extra something. And it just creates kind of awkward space and overcrowds our slides anyway. So that's why I think that a full bleed photo is a great default. Super clean, super easy to do. And finally, Paula adds a picture of her team, of the quality team at the facility, just to underscore that they're in this together, they're going to get it done, and that they are going to leave this training on a really positive note. And these photos, by the way, I see in the chat, there are quite a few sources. I think it's pixels. And if you're using Canva, the license it does cover the image download if you're using Canva paid. And so I'm happy to follow up with a couple of royalty-free image databases and other resources for getting really high quality and very diverse and stock photos that you can use. Okay, so these are the storytelling slides that Paula chooses. And now she's going to move on to getting into some of the legal technicalities, or at least diving into some of the details that she'll be sharing with the team. And this is where, for her, the real challenge comes in, because she's just not sure, like a lot of you said, how to filter all of that information. So we'll look at a couple of ways that she decides to do this. So the first thing she wants to share are some of the most significant record-keeping risk factors that the team needs to be aware of. So her first instinct is to make a bullet slide. So these are basically all of her notes. So as she puts this together, she realizes that this list is just a bunch of items. Again, they're kind of all disconnected from each other. They're all about record keeping, but it's hard to tell what you're supposed to do with them. What is the relationship between them? So what else could she do with these examples of risk factors? So what she decides to do is to create a continuum. And this is just a standard shape. It is a double-ended arrow, as you can see, with a gradient set to these stoplight colors, green, yellow, and red. And she's going to use this to represent the different layers and levels of risk. So as she goes through this, she's going to introduce different examples. Example 1. This one is going to be a record-keeping observation that's probably on the lower risk side. Example 2 will be higher risk. And example 3 will be one that's a little bit more ambiguous, potentially medium high risk. And what this kind of continuum diagram enables her to do is to situate each example, give it context, and to kind of pace out each item of learning so that her team, her clients can see and understand each of them one by one. And it's much more likely that they're going to remember where each of these examples lived on the continuum versus that long bullet list. So again, the takeaway is diagrams over bullet points. Okay, because diagrams show us the relationships between items and how they interact. A couple other diagrams you can think about using are like the cycle diagram, which, as opposed to like a step-by-step linear process diagram, you might use this to show different factors in one system and how they all affect each other. And then there's the classic Venn diagram, where you have a couple different elements that do differ, but also intersect, and you want to explore that intersection. So whatever diagram setup you use, the key is to making sure that you don't include too many elements and you keep it nice and simple and tied directly to your key insights. You don't want to have 7 circles in a Venn diagram. Really, 3 is probably the maximum. So keep it simple and make sure that you build it step by step. And finally, Paula is struggling with how to present an old record-keeping law with the newly amended version. And there are going to be a lot of differences between them. And she sketched them out. And the first thing she does to make it easier to understand is put it in a table. And that is not a bad impulse. It does make it easier to read versus kind of a random bullet list. But for the purposes of a presentation, this is still a lot of text. So maybe a table like this could be helpful as a leave behind, or when she follows up with more resources after a presentation by email. But in a presentation, she has to ask herself, what exactly are the insights that she needs to focus on right now? And when she asks herself that question, she decides on 3: complaint reporting, electronic records, and surprise inspections. So these are the 3 new significant requirements or elements of the newly amended law that do affect her clients. So these are the ones she's going to focus on. And again, it is important and critical to substantiate your conclusions. And I know we're really used to showing our work, and it is an important impulse to have, but it doesn't mean you're going to do away with supporting your recommendations, but just make sure that you have your raw data or your research in another accessible place. So again, it's either following up in another discussion or an email, or depending on the context, you might also put a table like that in an appendix slide. So let's say if you're presenting to a leadership team and it's time for a Q&A, like the CFO might want to dive deeper into some numbers, and so you can skip directly to that slide. So it's just a question of moving things around and making sure they're appropriate for their setting. And the setting of a presentation demands focused insights rather than raw data. Okay, so where is Paula? She's applied, again, these 3 design rules: text is visual, diagrams over lists, and insights over data. So here's what she's come up with. She's feeling pretty confident about this because all of these images are directly related to and directly support each of her key points. There's not too much in here. She knows that she's not going to be spending valuable presentation time reading along her slides, reading her slides to her client, as so many speakers she has seen speakers that she's seen often do. And so with very, very simple shapes, very bare text, and just a few well-chosen pictures, she's using this concept to create visuals that she knows will elevate her presentation and let her message shine through. So I know that we've covered quite a lot of ground here, but we've really been focused on those 3 aspects of story: structure, selling, and visualizing our business narrative. So I would love to hear from you. What is one new thing that we've talked about today, or that has come to mind for you, that you would be willing to experiment with in your next presentation? Diagrams, cool. Great. Yes, back to the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I like that. Yeah. I am so glad that a couple of these tactics have resonated. Ban the bullet point, love that. And I do want to know, because giving presentations is it's a lifelong process. And I, for one, will never be done improving mine or learning about new ways to make mine more effective. But what else? What are some other challenges that you've encountered, or other tactics that you'd like to explore that we didn't get to today? I'd love to come back to them in, another resource, and make sure that everything I produce is as helpful for you guys as possible. Okay, cool. How a story might be used with a status update presentation. Tech tools. Confidential information. Yeah, this is key, and that's like very tactical, very specific to legal. So I would love to follow up on that one for sure. No more than 6 slides. Are we talking about like a constraint that you've been given? Because I've definitely heard of that, where a team will say, no more than 6, no more than 15 slides. And that can be a challenge for sure. 1 slide always. Okay, well, keep them coming. I would love to, again, come back to these and, keep the conversation going, because you guys are really my source of directing my resources and making sure that I'm producing the best trainings for all you guys. So following up, again, I'd love to hear from you as things come to mind, as new challenges come to mind. Follow up with me. Find me on LinkedIn. Please connect, follow, however you want to do it. I also have a planner if you would like to go deeper. It's a worksheet that essentially covers all of the aspects we talked about today, but it is the universal structure that I use in all of my presentations, that I teach to all of my students. And you can download the PDF or the Google Sheets and use it, and experiment with it as much as you like. And as well, I know that Shai's going to be posting a handout, which does include a lot of these most pertinent slides, as well as some more text so you can follow up on what we talked about today. This is just the end. You have everything you need to tell really powerful business stories. Go tell yours. I'm excited to see what you produce. I want you to have a lot of fun with your presentations and produce ones that you'll be really proud of and that do you justice.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Val. Folks, if you enjoyed the program, please tell us in the chat. Definitely follow Val on LinkedIn. She's one of my favorite follows. I love her content there. This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Valerie, for a fantastic program. I'm excited to see all the wonderful legal presentations we spurned from this content. So we'll wrap up here. This was really wonderful. If you have questions, you can follow up with Valerie directly. So thanks again for tuning in and supporting In-House Connect. And thanks again, Val, for a wonderful program.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Shai.